Okay, so welcome to week 6 of our 8th grade math packet. Um, for this week, we're going to start doing our Algebra 1 prep, reviewing solving 1 and 2-step equations. This is TEAC 8.8C and 8.8.5A. Okay, so we'll begin here with our vocabulary words. We have inverse operation. Okay, now what does inverse operation mean? Well, the inverse simply means the opposite. So the inverse operation is the opposite of the operation. So if we're talking about addition, the inverse is subtraction. If we're talking about multiplication, the inverse operation is division, right? And then the next one is isolate. Okay, isolate. So when we isolate something, we are going to get it. What? When we isolate something, think about the word isolation when we use it, right? It just means alone. Okay, we want to get it alone. So remember that when we're working with solving equations, we want to get that variable alone. We want to isolate it so that way we know what it equals to. Okay, we're solving for that equation or that variable, shall I say. And then the next one is reciprocal. Okay, reciprocal. So um, so then reciprocal, of course, is a when we are flipping or changing our numerator and our denominator in a fraction. Okay, and when you multiply them, they have to equal to 1. So that'll make a little bit more sense once we get into it. So I'll just put on here flip. Okay. Now, of course, if based off those explanations, we should be able to write in now these vocabulary words into their definitions. So if I'm looking for solving an equation to get a variable alone, well, my keyword right there is alone. And which vocabulary means to get it alone? Right, isolate. Okay. Which one means the opposite operation, that undo. Okay, so undo, that's my keyword. So I'm gonna undo or do the opposite. So I'm looking at inverse operation. I'm gonna just write IO. And then two numbers are blank if their product is 1. So that's one keyword right there, 1. And then the other one is interchanging, which basically just means flipping. So that would be the one that we have left, which is reciprocal. Great. Okay, so now let's get into some examples here. Okay, I'm gonna get into the actual examples right here, or we're gonna talk about 1-steps. So right here, we're talking about 1-step equations, and just as it says, it's only gonna be 1 step that we're gonna do to isolate that variable. Okay, so in here I have x minus 12 equals to 3. Okay, so how do I isolate my variable? How do I get my x by itself? Okay, I need to get rid of the minus 12. But in order to do that and get it on the other side, I have to do the inverse operation. So what's the inverse of minus 12? Right, plus 12. And if you were to actually put this in the calculator, what's negative 12 plus 12? You get 0. So then these cancel out. So now once these cancel out, what you do to one side of the equation, the equal sign, you got to do to the other side. So on the other side of the equal sign, I have 3. Well, I'm going to have to add, because that's the reciprocal, of minus 12. So now what is 3 plus 12? Right. So 3 plus 12 is 15. I have my equal sign, and then I have my x. Because remember, I already got rid of the minus 12. So all I have left on this side is my x, my variable. And because I moved it to the other side, and I combined it with the 3, I have x is equal to 15. So my solution is 15. The inverse operation that I did was addition. Okay, now I know for some of us it's going to be very simple. Oh, I know how to do this. This is super easy. We've been doing this since 6th grade. For some of us, we still are having trouble doing this. Now, I understand that some of you all are going to be like, oh, I could just use my calculator and put this into Math Solver or my Inspire and solve for X. Yes, you can. But in high school, in Algebra 1, we need to know how to do this by hand. The calculator is only going to take you so far. So we can get away with it in 8th grade, but we need to know how to do this by hand when we get to high school. So we really need to use this time to practice and try to get this stuff done. Okay, I'm going to do another example with y'all for this one. I'll do this one just because it's opposite, or not opposite, but sometimes we tend to get confused just because the variable's on the right side as opposed to the left side, how we're more used to it. So here we have 13 equals 7 plus y. Okay, so again, I need to identify my variable. My variable is y, right? So that's what I need to isolate. That's what I need to get by itself. What am I going to do? I need to figure out, I need to do the reciprocal, right, of 7. Now, it's a positive 7 because there is no negative or minus in the front. Okay, so what's the opposite or the inverse of addition? Right, subtraction. So if I'm going to subtract, I'm going to subtract 7. And if I do 7 minus 7, we know that that is 0. So that cancels out. But what I do to one side of the variable or the equal sign, I need to do to the other side. So on either side, I'm going to put 13 minus 7. And if I go into my calculator and I do 13 minus 7, I'm going to be left with 6. And then my equal sign, and what's left on the other side? Nothing but my variable, which is y. So my inverse operation was subtraction, and my solution was 6. And solution is just another word for the answer. Or in this case, the solution of y. What did y equal to? Well, it equals to 6. Okay. So again, this is just an overview, a review, and make sure to pay attention or go and watch those videos from your regular teachers because those are going to be a lot more in depth and broken down. Okay, I just want to give you a different perspective or explanation, and hopefully you'll be able to understand it that way. So let's move on to the 2-step. So now, just as I said before, the difference doesn't change much with the 2-step, other than the fact that there's just more than one step to do. So let's go down here to this one, this bottom piece. So here I have 5x minus 3 is equal to 32. Okay, so where's my variable? Well, my variable is right here, x. This time, though, we do have a 5 attached to it. Okay, and that's where the second step will come in. But our first step is always still going to be, okay, to get rid of what is away from the variable. Okay, in this case, the variable is x. Well, yes, it does have a 5 attached to it, but we need to get rid of the minus 3 first. So what is the inverse operation of minus or subtraction? Addition, right? So plus 3. So minus 3 or negative 3 plus 3 is going to be 0. What I do to one side of the equation, I need to do to the other side. So I am going to add 3. So now, what is 32 plus 3? 35. Good. And then I bring down my equal sign. And then what do I have left on the other side? My 5x. So now, I'm down to this part, which is what we were doing on the first part, the one step. But now I have this 5 that's attached to the x. And I cannot have that. I need to get rid of that. So now, one thing we need to remember that we tend to forget, because I guess since we don't see it, there's always going to be an imaginary dot, okay, between the number and the variable. So if you have a number attached to a variable, there's always an imaginary dot. That imaginary dot represents multiplication. Okay, it represents multiplication. So because there is multiplication going on between us and it's understood, what is the opposite of multiply or multiplication? Right, divide. So guess what? We need to divide 5x, we need to divide it by 5. Now notice what happens. When I divide by 5, 5 divided by 5 is what? If you put that into your calculator, you get 1. So now I no longer have a 5 here. I have a 1x. Okay? Now, if I have a variable by itself, like we did in the top part, technically there's an imaginary 1 in front of it because there was one of that variable, 1x or 1y, whatever the variable may be. Okay? But because we don't write 1x. Okay, we don't write it. But if I see x plus 3 is equal to 2, then I understand that there is one variable of x. Unless there's a number attached to it, like here, where it says 5x, then in that case, I need to have only one. Because I want to know what 1x equals to. So when I divide it, 5 divided by 5, I get 1. So that's how I'm isolating that x. But again, what we do to one side of the equation or the equal sign, we got to do to the other. So I'm going to have to also divide 35 divided by 5. Okay? So then now I have my x by itself here. I have now isolated my variable. Okay? And now what is 35 divided by 5? Right, 7. So in this case, my answer is 7. And if I go up here, which is great because I do have a key right here, C is equal to 7. So 1 would be C. Of course, you should have more space, so you should be able to write it in here. So you do have this to refer back to. Okay, and I'll do one more. Again, just as I did in the others, the one-step examples, and I'll do the one that has the variable on the right side. So I'm going to identify my variable as A. Okay, and let's go red. Okay, so I have 68 equals 10A plus 8. So I already identified my variable, which is A. Okay, so now what is away from the variable? And I mean on the same side. I don't mean on the other side of the equal sign. What's on the same side as the variable, but away from it? Well, I have my plus 8. So I need to do the opposite, okay, of addition. Right, subtraction. So minus 8. So plus 8 or positive 8 minus 8 is going to be 0. So I have gotten rid of that. But again, when I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. So on this side, I'm going to subtract 8. And if I go into my calculator and I do 68 minus 8, I'm going to get 60. And then I'm going to bring down my equal sign. And then I'm going to bring down my 10A. So again, remember, I have 10A. In between, what did we say? There is an imaginary dot. That imaginary dot represents multiplication. So in order to isolate this variable, the A, I need to get rid of the 10. And in order to do that, I need to do the opposite of multiply, which is divide. So I'm going to divide by 10. And what is 10 divided by 10? 1. And now I have isolated my variable, but I need to do the divide by 10 on the other side as well. So when I do 60 divided by 10, I get 6. So 6 equals, and then I have A as my variable. So in this case, A is equal to 6. And if I go up here, I notice that right down here, I have I, which is my answer for number 2. Okay, I hope this has helped. Okay, with this, it's just a lot of practice. And I know that even at that, we still have some confusion. If you need to double check and go into your calculator and you do math solver, that's fine. Go for it. But again, it's very important that we're able to do this by hand because we will need to know how to do it for next year. Okay. Great job, guys. Keep up the good work. Stay safe.